have different people that came from, okay, we had conferences, so we actually went to these conferences where they had and all that stuff, but
Good evening, everyone. It is 6:30. We want to go ahead and get started for the fourth and final of our special training workshops. And before I turn it over, I do want to thank Mrs. King for making sure all of this was coordinated and planned out. I want to thank Sarah, Ms. Salmeri, and Attorney Rackets, Attorney Shepherd, everyone for coming out and being at every training. And just everyone, the town council members, board members, citizens. Training is good. Now it's just wonderful. So now with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. O'Leary starting us out.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Good evening. Even though we're smaller, mighty, right? My name is Tara Salmeri. I'm the town planner, and Patrick Brackens is a town attorney as well. And we've done some of the meetings of the planning board, so the planning board members know us. It's a pretty good topic for us to be together discussing the elements that we're going to discuss tonight. Topic 4 is the last topic of our training, and really this is on the discussion of who is on first, the players, the roles, and the development process. We had some discussions on the development process throughout my 9-10 months of being here, so I thought this would be also a good opportunity to talk about that. We're going to start with talking about the boards, and the 3 boards that we're highlighting tonight are the Historic Preservation Board, the Board of Zoning Adjustment, and the Planning Board. Now, all of those boards have different roles. They have different criteria, and even sometimes their terms are different. I just want to, before I go into a lot of the detail on these boards, I want to acknowledge that this is the first of the training that most of you did, none of you got advanced copies except for the actual sections of the code that outline each board. The reason for that has been that once I started doing all this review, I started finding so many inconsistencies. I was challenged with how I could describe what boards are when there are some things that I think are flaws in the land development code that might prohibit us from running efficient boards. So saying that, Patrick and I had a discussion and kind of talked about how we were going to go about the framework of the discussion for the board. So this is going to be a little bit of a higher level for the intent that there's probably going to be a need to do some cleanup when it comes to board responsibilities, designation, and districts. So that's just a
and I know I haven't met members of the Board of Zoning Adjustment or the Historic Preservation Board, but I'm Patrick Brackens, and I'm very happy to be with you this evening. I want to explain a little bit about it and also put you at ease a little bit about some of these areas. It is not unusual in large communities or small communities to find either some conflicting areas of the code that need to be cleaned up or things that direct you to one section of the code that maybe is no longer there. They happen pretty frequently, and they happened in another city that we represent in Ellen, where they redid their land development code, but they also left in certain sections of the planning board in the regular part of their code, and there were inconsistencies. And they had hired an outside contractor to redo their land development code, and they essentially got what they paid for. And over time, the longer your community's been there, the more opportunity there is for those kind of inconsistencies. None of these things are something that currently there's something coming before you that, oh, this is the problem, and you got to address it now, it's going to be an issue. But these are things that do need to be addressed going forward so you avoid that eventuality. As an example, just as an example, for the Historic Preservation Board, one of the duties that Tara was going to talk about in a minute is to review and approve certificates of appropriateness. And it refers you to the criteria for that review in the code. That area was taken out sometime around 2010, so there's
just on a high level, every board I'm gonna go over who can be board members and how long your terms are, what's considered a quorum, and what is a favorable vote. The information that is on the slides is taken directly from your code. So for the Historic Preservation Board, there's 5 members. This is the only board that the town allows members to be outside of the town. So there's 5 members. It says when possible to be a resident. It's appointed by the town council. You can have up to 7, but the criteria in the land development code requires a registered architect. I shouldn't say requires, it says when possible. A registered architect, another local historian, real estate or property appraiser, urban planner, engineering, or building construction. So those ideally is what should make up your historic preservation board per your land development code. The terms of 3 years, they're staggered, just like all the other boards. The 2 things that are not addressed currently are what's considered a quorum and what's a favorable vote. The original 96 land development code citations had those, but it looks like in 2010 some things got dropped. That's what the attorney was saying. So we don't, if you go into your land development code under the Historic Preservation Board, it makes no mention of how many people have to attend the meeting or what's considered, like, so if you have 5 people, you'll see in the other, you'll see in the other boards, it absolutely calls out how many people is considered quorum and what's a favorable vote.
And
I can see
Yes.
that you are needing clarification.
Right. And
Yeah.
why was it dropped? Did the council have to vote to drop it, or was it ever in there?
2 possibilities. We haven't been able to locate the specific 2010 ordinance, but there's 2 possibilities, and one of them might be good to do. It could be that, and this has happened before, an ordinance, once you pass it, then it has to be published, and usually the Muni Code publishes it. The Muni Code makes mistakes. And it's possible that the 2010 ordinance did not remove this information, but for whatever reason, when it was published on Muni Code, it didn't come back. So that's one of the things we're going to track down, and hopefully that's the answer. If that's not the answer, I have no idea why it was been removed, but it's an easy fix. And to give you an idea for a favorable vote, some boards require if you have a 5-member board, you still have to have a supermajority, so you have to have 5 members vote in favor or against, or in favor of an item to pass. Others require just majority vote or majority of members present. And how you do it is up to you. It's your question. The council. Yeah.
Yeah, so good questions, and that's why that's the kind of reason why we're dragging our feet, producing this, is we want to give you the best information, and so we're hopefully, these are kind of easy things to add in, as Patrick said. I did not include all of the items in the Historic Preservation Board, what it required, because I'll be pretty frank, when they updated the Historic Preservation Board, the amount of responsibilities is enormous for this board. So I don't know if you as a council would really want, I don't know if you get volunteers if you're having to do some of the stuff that the code says. Like, they're responsible for keeping up the book and inventory and some things that, are really typical. But there's required meetings, which are 4 times a year. If there's nothing to really be heard, that's just something that's in the code. There are no rules of procedure in the meeting code now, but in your 96 it had them. So and I'm just highlighting a couple of things in the responsibilities that are typical. You nominate buildings and districts, you evaluate demolition of buildings, so some people come forward, and appoint subcommittees. There's another is if any piece of land is in a site plan, they usually go to the Historic Preservation Board. The thing that I found a little interesting too is there's no map. So it doesn't outline where your historic district is. However, the comp plan has a map, and this is the map that's there, and if you're colorblind, it's probably challenge, but this is, all these little blue dots are the only things that the comp plan says is the district, but your 96 is very clear about it's the original 1919 boundary of the city. So that's a big difference. So we just really want to kind of find out if we're registered in National Historic District, so that's been registered federally with a different district. So those are just some things that the original ordinance has a whereas and tells you exactly where the district is. So those are the things that we're still trying to figure out is, did that disappear, did it change? So we'll, and the good news is nothing has been submitted to be reviewed, so we're okay. So the Board of Zoning Adjustment, there are 5 residents, and remember how it said in the Historic Preservation Board, it's an option to be a resident, but in the Board of Zoning Adjustments, it's a requirement. Again, you as the town council, you appoint them. The term is the same, it's 3 years, staggered, similar to the Historic Preservation Board, but here's where you see where things are outlined. Just 3 members are considered quorum, and a favorable vote is the majority of members attending the meeting. With your board, my font changed, okay. With your board adjustments, there's a couple of things that are in there. Ideally, they just handle the various applications, but you do have a section that allows your Board of Zoning Adjustment to hear and decide any appeals. So if the planning director, I'm a consultant that's doing the planning director role, if I made a decision that didn't have to go before the board and an applicant didn't like it, they go to the Board of Zoning Adjustment to say, we don't, we're not okay with this and we want to appeal it. Board of Zoning Adjustment is the one that determines that, so it's not the council.
Let me give you a brief example about where that works, how that works. In St. Johns County, when someone wants an interpretation of the comp plan, they can go to it's either the planning director or it might even be the county administrator, and they can ask for an interpretation of how the comp plan applies to their property, and he or she can render an opinion. If they don't like the opinion that was given, then they have an appeal right. Here, under the code, that appeal right would go to the Board of Zoning Adjustment to make the final decision. There, which is typical of most places, the final decision, even if the BZA offers a decision, would be the town council. And if I were to recommend anything to you about changing in the future, you would not want the unelected advisory or appointed officials making final decisions that could then end up in circuit court. You would at least want a second stage of appeal so that you all can make that decision. Okay. And the other, probably the more critical thing for you to think about as a town council is for the variance applications. The BZA, rather than the planning board, reviews a variance application. They hold the hearing, and under the code currently, if there is an agreed decision by the applicant, then they go straight to circuit court to appeal it. It doesn't come back before the town council. That might be something you want to change, so you at least have the opportunity to have that second layer of internal review before you pay us to go to court.
And just want to reiterate, these are not unusual. In the 80s, a lot of land development codes had it. So I just think that through time, a lot of things have changed, and you're not alone in having some of the stuff.
The city of Orlando had this exact procedure.
Yeah, I'm convinced there was one zoning code that got put out in 1926. Everybody just copied and pasted it because so many things are the same. Okay, so yes.
I just want to be clear. I'm clear to understand that the boards are only making recommendations to council, all of these boards.
No, that's what
Okay,
we're talking about.
that's what you, okay,
Yeah,
The BZA.
the BZA is different.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was kind of the whole discussion about how that is going through circuit court or
That's right.
goes to BZA. BZA
wouldn't have an appeal under for BZA for variances. They wouldn't be able to appeal that to council. That would, the only appellate right would then be the circuit court. And I would say that is, I'm not gonna say that's, not the way it happens everywhere. It did happen a lot in the eighties. I would say that's highly unusual now.
I mean, when Cliff went over the variance criteria, there's a lot, that goes into that, so that's why it's important to highlight what's happening.
Just pause for a second. So typically, a zoning, adjustment is if between two lots, if it requires 10 feet, and they are going to do their site plan and if they're encroaching above, the building may come 2 feet into that 10 foot. That's what that,
Describe what a variance is.
please.
Okay. You want to hear it? Okay. Okay, so a variance is lots of different things, but one of the examples is it's a variance, which means it's variance to the code. So, for simple terms, how I typically describe it is it can be a setback. So it can be a front setback, a side setback, a rear setback. There's other things that you can ask for a variance, but that's a lot of times that somebody, especially in an older home, they either want to build onto their home and they either want to have more of it in the front and then they would not meet the front setback and they would apply for a variance. But like we had talked about on Tuesday, it has to have a lot of special, you're not getting a special favor for getting it, but that's variance, that's one of the variances.
Typically, there has to be some type of hardship that the land has, so it's unique to the land itself. The applicant who wants the variance didn't come in and create the issue.
Okay.
Let's say you got a corner lot and you have a road issue and you need to violate the setback so you can actually have a fence that's safe, and it has to do with the shape of the lot. And so you would then ask for relief from the code on that. And there's criteria that you have to meet. But the hardships normally that they find that the applicant didn't create the hardship.
I have a question. On all these boards, what does the member have to know in order to make sound just decisions? Because we can't go on our own ideas, what we think or what should be.
Correct. And that's part of the presentation. But what you would get if you had a hearing for a variance, the first thing you would have is you have the application before you with the hearing. You would also have the staff report prepared by Tara, and it would go through and list the criteria that you're supposed to consider. You would have an opinion from her about whether or not the application meets the correct criteria that you can rely on, and it set the standards of what you're supposed to consider and how you're supposed to come about making your decision, or what's laid out in the code. So, and that does govern how you're supposed to render a decision. So, for example, it would be inappropriate if the code required A, B, and C, and the applicant met A, B, and C. You come up with a criteria G that's not in the code. That would be inappropriate. So you are bound. Members are bound not by how they would like the lot or the city or the town to look. They're bound by what the code requires them to consider.
That's what I'm asking.
Right.
Because,
You did that.
see, if one member knows A and B, and two members know C and A,
Right.
and so I'm saying the members need to know the whole package so that they can make these sound decisions. Because somebody might say, hey, it's 2 feet. And I say, no, it's 4 feet.
And that
And
happens.
then they come up and they have to vote on us, something comes up. How can they make a sound decision?
That's when you rely on, when you have the question, well, what does the code require? That's staff's responsibility to answer. And if you have a question about, well, how does that affect another criteria, or you have anything as it relates to a legal question, that's when your lawyer steps in and helps assist you with the answer.
So, Ms. Alomar, with some of the questions that you and I have discussed before, are our checklists and stuff up to date? Because we go through so much, I've heard so much from citizens and business owners that I did it this way, and then this person is, I did it this way. And I think that's where we run into a lot of problems. Kind of what Mr. Vereen is talking about is we don't have checklists. So I'm thinking, correct me if I'm wrong, when it comes down to the boards, you would like to see like the checklist there with all the criteria and it's checked off, and then if something is missing, then they can make a valid decision on it from that standpoint.
Yeah, and I'm having an answer. The short answer is yes and no. The checklist, when we get to the staff report, since I've been submitting staff reports, they are, I've created a template, and there are criteria that I personally go through and have identified that that's what needs to be done. It's what every city, has different ones, but we can create other things. But when I've submitted a staff report with this criteria, I always list that criteria. I go through, but I'll take you through all of that. Now, the other part of the question that you ask is that people, as an applicant, are saying, I had to do this, and I've dealt with that quite a bit since I've been here. And the application itself is a little old, so I'll give you an example. It asks for 6 copies. You don't really ask anybody to use 6 copies anymore. It's not really needed. It says you have to have a CD. Nobody gives a CD anymore. I had somebody drive one and actually courier it because they literally took it to heart that that's what they had to provide. So you have a unified land development application, which I think can cause some confusion because you're trying to have only one application for multiple things. And it might have worked when you had somebody who was full-time and they were guiding everybody here and saying, no, you don't need that. But when, I like to leave a place so that it doesn't matter who comes in, that you always have the same standardized forms. So sometimes it works when you have legacy employees and it works well, but when they're gone, then you lose that. So I'm more of a form person personally, but
Right. Is there a software out there that could go through and create that we can become more standardized and having our
yeah. And you don't even actually need software. Most of the stuff you actually have some hard copies of things you used to have in place, and it's not really a software because it relates to your code. So St. Cloud is one of my clients. They have a checklist, and then they actually outline exactly where in the code to find that criteria. So those are the things that you always want to customize to your code.
right. And I know you're saying forms, and I love forms too. And the good thing about a form is that I think one of the issues is also is there's so many variants of forms that's out there and don't have footnotes of which one is the latest one and all those things. So if we could have it, I think Ms. Johnson said the other night about somebody said about the website. If we can have it there where people can just go get the latest one, so
Yeah,
no
that's
longer
what
are
I
people
do.
making 50 copies of something and saying, "Hey, come and get it," because if something changed or law changed,
Yeah.
those things are obsolete, and then you passing out the wrong information.
Correct. And there's lots of softwares that will actually do all of it for you too. I just don't know the expense of those, but that is all. Everything is possible.
Having them on the website, and that way, if it does
Yeah.
change, just change.
Change that
Yeah,
one,
that's
and
perfect.
right, it's linked. Right.
As soon as I came in, I think I even converted some of the forms to PDF, so all I have to do is type. But we're still getting, I'm going down the road.
Okay.
But yeah. So, anyway, so
One last quick question.
Yeah.
So I think there are probably new codes on lot sizes to build homes. Back in the day, a 40-foot lot was sufficient. Now if they're now 50, which is the standard, if you're building a home on a 40, do you have to come before?
Okay, so
And that would be for like probably side setbacks and stuff like that, correct? So you would have to come and then those things have to.
What I would say is that, especially in Eatonville, and especially in any town that's been established for a while, there were developments that happened, and we're kind of jumping ahead because I want to go through. I actually have illustrations to show
Okay.
that.
All right.
And it's on me because you didn't get any of this in advance, but sometimes codes got put in place that didn't match the actual land. So now you put a scenario that when you do have some of those homes here, that they don't meet the current standard, but it's still a buildable lot. And what I would say is you don't do a variance, you change the code to meet the context. And there is no substandard. 40 feet is not a substandard lot. That's an absolute buildable lot. 35 foot is a buildable lot. That is affordable, and there's no reason to not allow that. And you have those examples. So that's kind of, that would be a recommendation, but I'm not the decision maker. So I'm just saying that, I don't think there's anything wrong with small lot. Okay, so the planning board is the 5 residents. Now, the BZA, what considered a quorum for a BZA, even though it was 5 residents, it was 3 members, but the planning board has to have 4. And the favorable vote is the same, so it's the majority. So just so you know, that's somewhat kind of difference in that those standards. The planning board duties, I think for the most part, that section is okay. It's an advisory capacity. They're there to do anything when it relates to zoning, any changes in the zoning regulations, rezoning applications. They recommend and review prior to the town council. The other part, the planning board here, some jurisdictions have a local planning, LPA, and they do the comprehensive plan. Your planning board, which is very typical in smaller municipalities, they do both. So they review the comp plan, they make recommendations if things need to change, and they kind of are the first pass at it. The other big items are plat review, site plan review, special exception. Plat review does go to the planning board. Site plan in the code, it's a little confusing on who gets to do the site plan. So sometimes it says that if it's residential, it doesn't have to go there, but the planning director has the right to put it through. So it's kind of the planning board duties. The town council, I just kept it only where your obligations are divorced, because you have a ton of other things aside from this. There's a appoint the members that are relevant, so you all as the council do appoint your members. You can also direct special studies. So if you want a historic preservation board or a member says to you, I think there is something really important in this is a board member, but they would not be able to do that without council saying, okay, you can do that.
Question.
Yes, Councilman.
My first board was planning and zoning back in the day.
Okay.
And let me be honest, I didn't have a clue. I was really at the mercy of our planner. And I don't know if I'm right along with the lines of Mr. Vereen by saying, if this planner tells us something and we're not versed in it, and we can vote, but we're going to your recommendation because we're going to your knowledge, but what helps us to be equipped, like you said, to make sound decisions? Just, you know what I'm saying, like, oh, the requirements can't go up there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And the board and the planner tells us, yeah, it can, but if we're not versed in this, you see, and no one catches it, then it's like we are, oh, I didn't know. You know what I mean?
You feel obligated that. So I have an answer. I don't know if it's a correct answer. I feel like the first responsibility is have people that you can trust and rely on that are technical experts in their field. Because I don't believe as a board member that that's your job is to know everything.
Okay.
I just don't. I don't think that is a fair
to make that a requirement then, be a certified board planner, be on that
You
particular?
absolutely can, and I will also share with you what happens in small communities is when there's turnover, if there's somebody retires or leaves, and then you need that assistance right away. But if the code requires you to have somebody that has the highest level of certifications, you might not be able to find an applicant to fill that role.
Right.
Cities and towns have this a lot of times with local government attorneys where they want somebody who's board certified, and there are a few of us. So, but there's always a situation where your code requires it, and nobody responds to your request for proposal, request for qualifications. It is. One way to do that would be to have the code say they either must have the certification or able to acquire it within the given amount of time. Some of it's realistic, a year or 6, depending on how long it would be, a year or 2 years. I think we've done that for a couple different places that the person didn't have it. They didn't have anybody that had it, but they wanted them to have it. So it was contingent upon them being hired that they obtain that certification within a certain period of time.
Okay.
And also remember, when hiring for that purpose, consider that when you're going after those certain credentials, that they have to have a salary that they're going to be looking for, a salary that's comparable to that. So that's got to be considered in that. So if you're going to get what you pay for. However, if you're going out with a board certified, it could be adjustments in the budget to make sure we have the salary restraints in that too as well.
And that with small communities that happens. all
That's
the time.
tough.
So you have to do what you can with the resources you have.
Absolutely.
And so we're to let our boards know that we understand that you may not know everything and that you have to rely on our department heads and staff to help you make the sound decisions, because I feel what Mr. Green is talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've personally, I was on the board of zoning adjustment for the city of Orlando, and I was a training planner and certified, and I was highly uncomfortable in a lot of situations because I didn't know their code either. I had the skills to find it, but sometimes I couldn't even find it. So I knew how to challenge the planner, and that's City of Orlando. So the only reason why I say that is that my 24 years of doing this work, this is one of the first towns I've ever worked for that has the level of care and belief of responsibility. So you're way ahead of the game in most communities. Like a lot of other boards, they're like, hey, you know. So I think this amount of caring is good, and asking questions. But I'll go through the staff report with you too. And then the other thing I would say is, yes, having certifications is good in small towns. What I do as well for a lot of small municipalities is they might not have a certified planner, but I do all of the final reviews. Like Safety Beach, they don't have a planning director, and they won't. The staff has to send me any decision renderings that they make prior to that report going out. So I'm looking at that to ensure. So that's something you can do too. If you can always have people that, just like you have CPH engineering, just like you have a town attorney, you can do that too. So you have options.
And on the legal side of it, so it's a quasi-judicial hearing. I'm going to talk to you about that on Tuesday. But you have to make your decision based on competent, substantial evidence you hear at the hearing, and you have to correctly apply the essential requirements of the law. So when your certified planner gives you the testimony that this either complies with the code or doesn't, that is testimony you can rely on. That's competent, substantial evidence. That's the stuff you need. It certainly is weighed more heavily when it comes to somebody that has that higher certification.
But you also have to rely on intent, because everybody's interpretation of the same things may be different.
That's true. But when it comes to some of the metrics in planning, there can be a level of interpretation. In a good staff report, they're going to identify that so that you absolutely know that that's an interpretation. That's And so, I just went through some of the staff, because that was a question too, is what's the role of staff? With your town clerk, that the town clerk is really the custodian of the
Oh, okay. All right, yeah. So the town clerk is essentially the custodian of your records. Your ordinances, your resolutions, your contracts, all of that stuff. She promulgates procedures for how that stuff is managed, and she's your main, especially for your council report, she's your main contact to go back and forth with. She's also our main contact with her, so we need to speak with them. She does the notices. She makes sure when, even though, and I'm sure this is, if y'all have done Sunshine and Public Records training, you know that if someone sends you an email about public business to your Gmail account, that's a public record, whether you give it to her or not. She's your custodian of public records, but each member that possesses them is also responsible for them. And she prepares the minutes, and there are certifications available for clerks as well. I'm not familiar with the criteria for each one of them, but there are programs for certification.
The planning director, that's really, a lot of the questions you already asked is, in this role, is the planning director's responsibility to interpret the code, and to interpret the comprehensive plan. Also to provide the analysis and research, and provide the evidence to support the planning inquiries. There's an implementation of all of that too. The sole obligation of the planner is not to insert. You can insert your opinion, but you have to declare that that's an opinion and that's not a policy. In the quasi-judicial process, the planner should really only be sticking to the facts. So that's just what has to be done. The planner will make any of the updates or revisions to your land development code. In larger communities, the planning director would have multiple staff doing all of that. The certification for planners, it's the American Institute of Certified Planners. It's a national designation. You have to work in planning for a couple of years if you have your master's. If you have your undergrad, it's 5 or 6, unless they change it before you can sit for it. The thing that makes the certification for a planner interesting is once you get certified as a planner, you're bound by ethics, and there's like 15 or 16 different standards. So take for example, if I was working somewhere and someone thought I violated an ethic of the AICP while I was doing my job, they could report that to that board, and they would investigate, and they would review my reports to determine whether or not I had violated. And if I do violate it, my certification will either be suspended, revoked, or so that's the surety sometimes that you get with the certification that you can rely on, that there is recourse to that. Your Public Works Director.
Talking about the position of the Public Works Director is really your main person that handles the responsibilities of your infrastructure of the town. That can consist of course, water, sewer, roads, also your sanitation, and any professional engineering drawings, of course. They could be a professional engineer or not, or have the ability or skill set to review plans from that skill set. Also in that role, you're looking for certain ones that maybe have went through some of the training through the APWA, which is the American Public Works Association. They have the leadership training as well as the skill set training to be able to direct, manage, and oversee the skill sets that we just mentioned, from sanitation to maintenance, water and sewer above. Most public works, you either have that engineering degree or could be a public administration area or supervision for that area, but that's the criteria you're normally looking for in the role of the public works director.
Similar in the town, you have CPH as well that does some of that
notice that the applicant's attorney doesn't raise their hand. They don't testify. They can present their case, they can present what they want you to know, but the evidence comes from either the applicant or the other people or folks that they introduce. They don't provide the evidence. They give you documents to review, and that's evidence. That becomes part of the package. But when an attorney talks, it's not evidence. And basically, at the end of the day, we work together for a little while, and issues come up, we deal with it. For the applicant's attorney, it's just a little different in the planning process, but they play an important role. But just during the hearings, I think Cliff probably talked about that. Just remember, what comes out of the attorney's mouth is not evidence. It may lead to questions to develop evidence, but they're advocates.
And this just kind of reminds me when I was talking about the planning director role and the attorney, we work pretty closely together on the interpretation of the code. So I know there was a question of how is this being interpreted. If I question anything and I'm not able to figure it out, especially in a community that I don't work full time for, I always talk to the attorney, say, this is what I've seen, this is what I'm interpreting. Do you see this the same or different, or what have I missed? And a lot of times we're doing that together.
But there's another important caveat too. We can all read the code, particular line of code, and know what it says. If it's ambiguous, or the planner asks the attorney, what does this mean? I can give her an opinion. You ask me what it means. I can give you an opinion. But at the end of the day, when it's decision time, you guys decide what your code means. So whether you're the planning board making a recommendation, or the BZA ruling on a variance, or the town council making a final decision, at the end of the day, you guys determine what the code means.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit already about the staff report. You'll see, this is just an example, but I started kind of having something that every time you see it, it's going to have an application, it's going to have the name, it's going to have the address, it's going to tell you what the location is, it's going to tell you how much the acreage is, what the zoning is, what the land use is. It'll talk about the surrounding areas so that you, even though you all know your area very well, it's just helpful to know what the standard is. So you'll have that, you'll have a picture and a map so that you can, see exactly where that is. The first couple of sections of the staff report always talks about whether it's consistent with the policies. I personally like to outline the policies so that board members do not have to go to a policy themselves, that I'm providing as much information so that I'm making it as easy as possible to have all the information in front of you to render that decision. There are times that there will be a planning board member or someone looking at it and saying, I saw this policy and that's an absolute okay to do, but to me that's the job of the planner, and that's what the planner should be doing, is talking about your policies, identifying those, preparing the analysis, so looking at the area, looking at what this is going to do as a result of whatever that request is. Always including supporting documentation. So that supporting documentation either comes from the applicant. So when an applicant comes in, the first thing that a planner will do is, one, is it sufficient? Did they give you enough information? Two, if they didn't give you that information, you have to document that, reject it, or tell them you have to submit additional information. When there's land use changes and maybe that there's no support for that, you can ask, the planner can ask for a market report. You can ask for a traffic study on when it's rendering on a legislative action. You can ask for a lot of things that you don't necessarily have in the code. When it's quasi-judicial, you're limited to the requirements that are already in the code. So then there's kind of the findings of that. What you'll see, and what it's been great going through this training too, because I'm always trying to figure out what is gonna make things easy for a board member and a council member. So the thing, and I would love any feedback. So whenever you have a report and you think, hey, I don't like the way this is being laid out, then it can get laid out different. The thing that I've noticed after some of these topics is I think that the application should be very clear, and maybe in our agenda items we will have quasi-judicial matters, and then have those listed, and then legislative matters, so that then okay, we're in the quasi-judicial section, and the staff report can actually remind you of that too. So I just think that that might be helpful.
The jobs are hard enough to know having to always know who's on first, what my responsibilities are, legislative hearing and quasi-judicial hearing. And it's perfectly acceptable, we should do this. If you're ever at a place where you're confused about what's the standard that I'm supposed to apply, ask. That's why we're here. Having that on the agenda already identified for you what type of, if it's a hearing, quasi-judicial or legislative, go ahead.
The one thing that Attorney Chuck did on that one that we did have, he asked, did that questionnaire, so they kind of told you right there, he told us.
Right before I got up to talk about this rezoning, this so much later, and at the planning board meeting, is this coverage, and that's what he kind of, he introduced the item, and that's really good, as well. But I would also say of every board member and every council member, you can absolutely always ask, if it's not there, what is this item, or is this out of the ones that we're doing, what is this item, and let us know. And sometimes it's helpful too if you have audience and citizens that maybe are a little upset. They don't know. They will not know. I've been doing this 24 years, and sometimes I get confused. So it's not a level of the expectation of the bar that you put on yourselves is very high. Always ask, me or whoever the planner is, whoever the attorney is, to remind you, because that's really what our jobs are. That's what we're supposed to be doing.
And for example, if it's maybe not contentious, but it's a very important event for the community, whatever the hearing is. And you know the answer to the question whether or not it's quasi-judicial and what you have to do, but maybe 90% of the people in the audience don't. You can put the burden on staff, on the attorney, to explain what's going on a little bit, so then perhaps it has a better look, or the person who explains it the way that maybe they don't want to hear comes from us rather than from you.
And that's what we're going to do. Yeah, we've done that. So, and in every staff report at the end, there will be a recommendations section. I'm going to have you kind of talk about the recommendations.
So if it's at the planning board, so for the town council, you don't have the recommendation, now you make the decision to deny, approve it, approve the conditions, or approve it in part, or with or without conditions in that part. But for the planning board, it's always good to have those, or advisory board that's going to make recommendations, to have their options in front of what they can do, whether you're recommending denial or approval, or conditions, and what some of those conditions will be. So if it's a recommendation from staff will list what they recommend, or she recommends the conditions be. That doesn't mean you're limited to those conditions. You can always ask, well, what about this, what about that? And you can get advice from staff on that as well. But that's always helpful to have those things before.
But that's a good question. So when you talk about recommendation of approval with conditions, or with or without conditions, if it's quasi-judicial, then only have the conditions that are allowed in the meeting.
Right.
And if it's legislative, it's just okay. Okay.
Fairly open.
Yeah, like for example, your site plan in the land development code, it actually outlines the conditions, and it tasks the planning board to, if they deny, they have to list the reason for denial.
And that's part of the statute too.
Yeah, so you have to actually, because if you're denying a special exception, and that's quasi-judicial and the special exceptions outlined, and you deny it, but you, don't list it, at the end of the day, there still has to be a letter and that denial has to come. So either staff or town clerk, everybody's having to, reread everything to hear why was that denial? So moving forward, we're probably gonna ask,
And
not the state.
we would need that reason to have been done at the hearing, even if
Yeah.
it didn't make it in the order at the hearing, because we can't come up with it after the fact.
Yeah, so those are kind of the primers. I've done some staff reports that have approval with conditions, and then listed conditions. There have also been some planning items that there were approval and the planning board had, modified conditions and had conditions as well. So, there's some, and like you said, it's, the conditions can be, as a result of what is in the land development code. I guess if they agree to a condition, you put that in.
So long as it's lawful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where you really need an attorney, because as a planner, sometimes we'll ask for more if we're trying to help the town, but yeah. Okay, so those are the boards and that's staff reports, and then I had a question on the process of development. So I thought that I would kind of walk you through a few of the really big pieces of what happens when development comes through. So there's lots of things. Not every development will have a development agreement, and then I'll go through all these individual ones. But a developer's agreement can vary.
It can, but it's basically a way, it's typically for large projects, so for, if you're gonna have a large housing development, you're gonna have issues with infrastructure and utilities and drainage and stormwater. And so who's responsible for what, how that affects certain credits, all of that stuff and the timing of development and what needs to be met before, if it's gonna be done in stages, that's the kind of thing that can be laid out in the development agreement. It's, let's probably talk to you all a little bit about what it's not, what you can't put in a development agreement. But typically they're for large projects, which does require some, utilities, undergrounding, when the roads are gonna be built, timing and things like that.
Are they, in whose review, where, do they go through a board, or are those negotiations and the terms of these agreements at the council level only?
They, I don't, if the code requires,
It's council.
it would be, council has to sign off on it, would be the vote.
It does not go to a board, not in the code today.
Currently, the code doesn't have to go through. But, there's it depends on who drafts it, when you draft it. So if somebody had plans to want to build a large housing development, but they were simply, at this stage, coming to change the zoning on the property, which would allow them later to create a site plan, that's not the time to create the development agreement, because you don't know if they're actually going to have the ability to create the site plan in the future. But when and who drafts the first version, it normally is on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes the developer will want to take a stab at the first version, and we typically heavily revise them. Other times, we'll want to do the first version. So it depends, but it also it's in conjunction with Public Works and other agencies. Sometimes have to be involved. Sometimes you have to get your special permit from FDED if there's an issue there. So they're the typical part of large development applications, but they happen later on in the process after comp plan.
But our current code calls for that developer's agreement to be presented to the council as a whole and approved by majority vote by the council.
Correct.
Okay. And it's specifically that has not been done, and I know this will probably not be today, but if we have some time at the end, what would be the process to reverse or
You don't. Once it, that,
so
that's
once
binding
it's
contract.
executed, regardless of whether or not the proper procedures were. So if we have time at the end, can you share best practices?
Well, one of the best practices is that we've talked about some things that need to be cleaned up in the
So is it possible to do some things that changes to the code or possible revisions to the code that are more, quicker to get through a process than those that may be more cumbersome, that may be beneficial for the town, hence developers agreement?
Well,
with
the one thing development agreements don't do is, unless you're busy, they don't give you the right to skip the development review process.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, some of the, I know, the questions are, they are best practices, but it was in the code that it was to happen, so. Okay, so I know I just wanted to walk through just some of the terms and examples of what some of the boards would see. There's always kind of a discussion on what really is a plat and what is a site plan. And then what I would say is that, you know, when you start over here, that can be the original first kind of piece of land. And this could actually be an entire plat as well, but when you look at this overview, this would be kind of an overall plat. You can also go all the way to a plot, which these are individual. So if you had a subdivision like Calhoun, that would have been one individual plat at one time. Then it would have moved into a plat where all of that land is divided. You can identify parks. You can identify where roads are, where your infrastructure is. So that's a level of plat. Dedications. Yeah, if there's any deed restrictions, that's where everything goes on plat. Recently we had a vacation of an easement, if you remember, with the Zaxby's kind of property, and they wanted that vacation so they could split and then sell. So that was a plat that they had worked on. A lot of, because you don't really have a whole lot of land that's being replatted, you are seeing, I am getting inquiries now of a couple of pieces of land that are 2 to 3 acres that they want to plat it. They want to make smaller lots. So you're going to see some of that coming through. Site plans. So a site plan, once this plat has come in, then the site plan really is where the nuts and bolts kind of get put in. So I'll walk through the difference of the plat review. So the plat review, it's the subdividing of the land. You can name that. You can have subdivision. You have some business parks that have names. That's why those names are there. That is usually attached to the plat. Has the legal boundaries of each of the parcels, and then it has those common areas. So the steps are, how that goes to be is the plat review, and the criteria for plat goes to your civil engineer today, that's CPH. I coordinate and the planner coordinates only to review that the subdivision of land is not violating the zoning. So I'll look at it to say, are they making lots that can be buildable? Because we don't want to approve that and then come back and say, oh, you know, now we need all these special conditions. They could come as a plan development and ask for that, but that's the stage of what's happening. Civil is looking at, you know, is there water? Is there infrastructure? How's Altamont doing with our needs? Or, you know, is this DOT? Is this going to be a function? How many access points are coming in? Is it? So that's kind of there. The plat does go to the planning board, and it also goes to town council. If it's in the historic preservation, it will go there on top of the rest. So they will always add to it because they're a level reviewer that his main interest is to protect the historic nature. So everybody has a little.
So what you just said, the historical board, we could get part of the process, do they go after the planning?
They would typically go before. And then some municipalities will do a joint meeting. So that's just something that you can do. It depends on the expedition of if you want to expedite a process, you can always do this. So the site plan review, this is where things get a little different. This is where the life becomes a little bit more, the piece of land becomes a little bit more vibrant to the land. So you're going to see building placement, you'll see where have they met landscape standards and lighting, and where's dumpsters, and what are the dimensions of the parking stalls? So that's where a lot of specifics get worked out. So, sometimes we'll hear from developers, we don't need to really talk about that. They're right when it comes to certain things. They're not in the process, they haven't figured out that detail, but the details matter because that's what everyone cares about once it's being built.
The only thing I would add to that is a lot of times when you get, especially on an important piece of property, important for the community, at the early stages, comp plan change and zoning change, the applicant will come in and tell you, this is what we want to do with the property if you get our changes. They can tell you that all day long. But ultimately, they get their comp plan change and their zoning change. Well, they haven't done a plat review, they haven't done a site plan yet. But they told you they're going to do with the property or how it's going to look or what they're going to put where. That can change. And whether you remember that when they come back for site plan review, well, you told us you're going to do this and now you do that. That's not a reason to deny it if they met all the criteria, but it's something that you should remember because it does happen. They have the right to do that because things do change, the economy changes, but that happens. So it's not something you should remember, but it's also not necessarily something that's wrong morally that they've changed where they're going to put stuff.
Yeah, and some of the reasons why that happens is site plan is the most expensive thing to do because you're actually having to locate utilities, locate your topographic location, see about your grading, see if it's possible. So sometimes, in fairness, they might look at the site and think they can do things, but then when we're doing their engineering and their environmental, they realize they can't. So that can be the criteria. Other times, they're just making estimates and hoping that they get it, whatever they can at that moment. There are jurisdictions that will hold, and we had a discussion with a few applicants that you don't have to wait if you really want. If an applicant submits a site plan to a planner, the planner is going to review it. Sometimes applicants will come before you and show you site plans, but they really haven't gone through the process. If they want to ensure that, they can bring it all together. So they can ask for their amendments, they can look at a plat, and they can do a site plan. A lot of them don't want to do that, but if you're pushing back, that is an option you can always provide them. Well, if you'd like to bring it all, we can look at it that way, we can do it.
It's not something you can require.
Right.
So if they're there for a comp plan change, well, we need to see a fully engineered site plan before we can get that. I would advise not to do. But that's certainly an option to the extent they're willing to put forth that money and that effort, time, do it all at once. Let's say you get that situation. And legally what you're required to do is just do it at the same meeting. Do the comp plan, then the zoning, then the plat, then the site plan. You just have to make sure you're doing it in order because the comp plan would have to be changed before you do the site plan.
But I think just the question too is, it's not the town's responsibility or obligation to let a developer or a parcel owner know what their highest, best yield is on their land. It's their job to figure that out. And even though they might think they can do things, the town has it can't answer that question because you have to go to the level of site plan to get a specific answer.
And let's a legal example that I actually lived through. Let's say the planner does say, yeah, you can do this, and they'll approve that.
Planners have said it.
And that happens. That's not, they can't use the law then and say, oh, we get to build it because she said so. And a lot of them work, that's called estoppel, and we litigated that issue for almost a decade and everyone. So, you can rely, they can rely on staff, but they can't, that doesn't allow them to do whatever they want or violate the comp plan because the staff aren't told them to.
Is there a time requirement to start construction after the approval of the site plan? Like, is it 6 months, a year to actually start construction?
The answer is Yes, typically, and I'm not sure,
Specifically, right?
specific in the town.
It could be 90 days, it could be.
And you can ask for an extension too.
Right.
I think that your code allows for an extension, but offhand, I'm not sure it's done.
In most codes, and that happens for building permits is the better example. You pull
Yeah.
a building permit, you have a certain
It's
amount of
usually
time
building
before you get it
permit.
finalized, but you can ask for an extension.
And,
I got a question.
yes, sir,
I'm looking at civic engineering,
civil engineer,
other agencies. I've been on this board for quite a while now. I haven't yet to see these different things come through the planning and zoning.
I know.
None of it. You know, the building, we haven't heard from, our engineer.
Well, you do hear from the engineer, so let me walk through and then we'll talk about it, but I hear what you're saying. So the civil engineer, so there are things that happen before the planning board gets it or before site plan is reviewed. That's the way it's supposed to happen. So when, an applicant comes in for site plan, they submit it, the town, just so you know, this is very, very challenging. Your code says the town has 5 days to look at a site plan and determine if it's sufficient. 5 days. So, so if anybody wanted to really push back, it's 5 days. So anytime I'm doing a site plan, immediately I am rejecting it.
Start the clock over, right?
Yeah. Because I say it's insufficient, it's very easy to call it insufficient, but it really isn't good practice. I mean, you don't want to be because most people most people are never sufficient immediately into it, but eventually they will be sufficient and you have 5 days and then you have to. So what happens is the applicant comes in, they fill out the unified development, they provide their sets of plans. Immediately, how the town has been doing it is they intake the site plan, they see if it's sufficient. It goes to CPH, who's your civil, and CPH is looking at everything underground and then also above ground when it comes to asphalt and grading and how that is. So they're evaluating it from a civil engineer. They're making comments, and then planning is looking at it saying, are the setbacks there? Did that work? Did they meet it? Did they not? So in your code, they call it the Development Review Committee, even though there isn't really a clear committee. Nobody's doing that. They're not meeting the way typical, but it's kind of small. I don't know if you really need that. So, but
His question is about the other agencies like
yeah.
DOT.
So while all that's happening, your town also requires Orange County Fire Department gets to review it. So the site plan applicant is sending that to those departments for their comments. All of the comments come in right now as the planner. I'm looking at all their comments and coordinating with every one of these agencies to ensure that the review is happening. And that's all kind of behind the scenes of how we're looking at land. So none of that should ever come to you until the internal staff and these other agencies have said that this site plan meets the criteria. So as a planning board member, you should be getting the final or the preliminary site plan after everyone has made sure from a technical standpoint it's been met.
And it hasn't, then it's
And
not.
if it hasn't, it
it's not
doesn't get to see
sufficient.
you. And what you said is it never has seen you. So your code also says there's some conflicts in the code. So the code says if there was a variance or a special exception or a use that wasn't permitted, or it is any non-residential zoning district, it goes to the planning board. residential districts don't. So I don't know how to answer how it hasn't come, but that's what the code says.
Would
The
that
code
be
says
part-
we have it done.
would that be part of the staff report?
Correct.
Yes. Yep, and then the staff report would come, and then, you would have, a copy of that site plan, and that's what your code says it has to be done.
You say it would have to have.
Yeah,
And it's for non-residential.
yeah, but there are, things in their code that were kind of interesting too. If it becomes a adjacency issues, so it says that if it's an intense development, that should come through as well. So that would be an apartment complex.
So it's not, no residential.
Yeah, it's very,
Not
it's,
single family.
that's what I said, it's very, I would clean that up, so I don't think it's clear.
So tell me, how do we get some of these things in here? And like I said, it's a conversation you and I had before, where it has things in about a planning director. And I remember in the council meeting, we said we never had a planning director or whatever. How did that information get into that? Some planning directors had the authority to approve things without it going to boards and all that. Do we know how that happened?
I don't.
I don't either. Because there's too many things, there's too many unknowns. It could have been a direction, it could have been the interpretation. I think it is very clear, but I also can see where it's muddy. So, it also says that the planning director has discretion. And then it says, comma, as long as the following are met, and then it outlines them. So, it's a very, as a plan, I don't know. I mean, there's so many different scenarios, I don't know. Yeah, but they're being signed off, so not only, so it didn't have to, so the planning board can be skipped, and it's the same criteria for town council, so town council should have gotten it as well.
Comes back to my discuss this property that's being built now.
Yeah,
That has never come before
yeah.
this board. Never.
There is one provision in your code that says that a matter is supposed to come before planning. Is it limited to which types of matters? I can't recall, but I recall because I had not seen it
Oh,
before.
that's interesting.
Was that if planning doesn't take up, in other words, hold a hearing within 60 days on the matter,
It's a recommendation.
It's considered as a recommendation for approval and immediately goes to town council.
So that's a possibility too, there might not have been a quorum, I mean, there's so many unknowns, I don't know. I don't know.
My last question, I have to go to another.
Yeah, we're.
How long would it take us? I mean, hypothetical. You don't have to be concrete. How long will it take for us to go through and get these codes and everything to the right standard, and it's all mirroring and it's all matching up? How long would that take? Or do we need to hire an external contractor, somebody to come in and do that to make sure it all matches up along with y'all assistance?
I can tell you to go that last route and hire somebody.
They're gonna drag it out.
It's expensive, but all that you can end up where my other town ended up, where they didn't do a particularly good job because they
Okay.
didn't know it. If you gave us carte blanche to clean up your code and rewrite it, that would take a while. And it would be expensive. My recommendation to you, and I'm happy to put this in writing, identifying specific like triage. Get the most important here are the things that we can identify in consultation with staff and with you. These are the things that we think are the most important. Do you agree? Can it be, okay, we can bring you back an ordinance, we can have an ordinance for this. For example, the historic preservation boards with respect to certificate of appropriateness and the quorum numbers and all that. We can have that for you. I would say the next meeting, I'm not when the next meeting is, but yeah, within a meeting or two.
You have an email tonight.
Okay, all right.
But, and then there's,
But there's some things that, so there's an administrative section, the zoning districts, but yeah, but let me make sure that before, yeah, and so we're done. It's really, talking about building permits and where that goes. After all of that approval happens, it gets sent to Universal, who gets contacted. And then they review electrical, plumbing, structural, and then that's when construction begins, there's construction meetings and inspections. So I think that's it, and then we'll have questions. I just wanna make sure that whoever has to go kind of got the whole thing.
Okay, so quick question. Maybe when we're thinking site plan, we're thinking of a huge flips of paper that goes to a department to sign off on, as opposed to it being shrunk down to 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and that's then attached to the application and what's coming through planning and zoning, and it says site plan on there, but it's now about this small. So maybe, and I'm not saying that this is the case, but is it possible that things were reviewed because it was shrunk down to the 8.5 by 11, as opposed to an expectation that it's the, how you get the architectural plans?
It's a play.
No, that is the site plan.
Yeah, I can't answer whether that, I have no idea whether that's what happened. But what I can suggest you what you can do in a lot of places we do. So at a planning board meeting, if you're reviewing a site plan, staff reports on small sheets of paper. But you can have a table just like that. And you can set out the giant site plans that are much easier to read and put them out on a screen or sheet of paper. You all can come off the dais and look at it. And as long as the microphone can pick it up, you can ask the applicant or ask staff, and and ask your particularized questions.
So there's a couple of other things that I would also say. I don't really, and it's really the town council's decision. I don't know if, you have to think of it in two ways, in my opinion. One is, if an applicant is meeting everything that your code is doing, do you want them to go through this level of review that if they need it, why are they going to these steps to have to review things that if they meet the code? Some municipalities have thresholds, so if you have a development that's 50,000 square feet, it goes through that. Some places allow the planner to do the site plan and it's council. So those are some things that you can really think about. Do you really want the board looking at all of the site plans that come through? It does hold up development or not.
Or even the denial, but if it's going to be a denial.
Yeah. But if you have rules, but if it's a negotiated site plan or a special exception, so there's lots of ways that can be done. The second thing I'd say is when the question was asked about what can be done and how long, some changes are extremely easy to make. I mean, they're not hard to make. I have written probably 150 land development codes in the state and outside of it. It's not ever really the technical writing that takes a while. It's going through the process. So if you wanted something rewritten, some of the administrative section, you always want your attorneys to do that. But there are pieces that really need the town council's opinion on what you want and don't want. And that's the most important. The writing and drafting is not the problem. It's never a problem. It's not, that is not the issue. It's just to ensure that the elected officials today, and if you want your planning board in, that they have a say in what gets added. So that's and in your community, you have to decide if that's, the route that you want to take. Those are, as the decision maker, as Cliff said this past week, we did not get voted in here. So you decide how you want that approach, and there's lots of ways to solve it.
I would only add to that. I probably misspoke a little bit when I talked about the ordinance. We would draft the ordinance, but when it came to the technical changes in the code, if it had to do with setbacks, for example, we would, I don't know what the setbacks would be, but we would look to the planner and we would look to you to give us direction. Producing that product is not the issue.
I know we took a lot more time tonight, but the questions were great. That's why we led to topic 4, is to build up to a lot of those council for really wanting us to do this. So I hope it's been helpful. And know that you don't have to remember anything that we talked about at all. It's just us to, it's every time you hear it, you'll know more and you'll know more. And that's just the way it is. And, you know, there's never a time that you can't ask. There's never a time that you can't even pick up the phone when you're ready for an item and say, okay, what is this? You know, you do it on the fly. There's, that's our job. That's our job.
Just for the council and the board, I thought it was necessary to have the training because although you don't have to know everything, being aware of your policies just helps you to be more informed when it comes to making decisions because you're advocating for your community. Would you be interested in ongoing training, even if it's twice a year? Because there are laws that change, and when laws change, the planner will be in a good position to come in and update you on those laws, so you'll be better to make decisions. So that's why I just felt that if you knew more, you'd be able to make better decisions. And I applaud you because every night you showed up. You had an average from 15 to 17 council and board members. You are the governing people who make decisions for this town. And so the fact that you all showed up for every session really lets us know that it's needed and it's desired. You know, but this was the first, and just wanted to know if you all would be interested in continuing it.
Absolutely. And I have one last question. Is there any, not that you're trying to become a certified planner or whatever, but are there different trainings that you may be aware of to follow up probably on what Mr. Vereen was leading to that would better equip board members with just general, I mean, not that you can.
That's how this all started. I sit on a board, a local board, the training came out, I sent it to the former CAO, and then the planning board members attended. So that, so yes, there's, the League of Cities might have,
Okay.
we can take a look to see how, but yeah, there are training of planning officials, there's, training of the BZA, like there's opportunities that the League of Cities does. There's probably a historic preservation might have one.
And what I may suggest, not to cut you off, and this would be obviously layering something else on if appropriate to, thank you, okay, to Veronica is, if those trainings are out there, they may not just be for current board members, but for board members, people that have a desire to serve on a board. So if there are links now on our new website, and then that way when a person submits an application to be a board member, they may say, I attended which makes them sometimes a little bit better qualified.
All right. With that being said, good night, everybody. Good
I mean, you all did it. Y'all showed up. I'm telling you. Good night. All right, on to something next.